After 25 years of marriage, I thought I knew Camila inside and out. We'd grown together, navigating youth and parenthood. Yet now, she feels like a stranger. It started subtly, more frequent girls' nights, longer work hours, and guarded behaviors like keeping her phone close. Conversations became short and distant, even her laughter felt forced. I dismissed these changes at first, blaming stress or my own neglect. But the cracks in our connection widened. Her perfume changed, her attention wandered, and our once shared life seemed fractured. Late nights brought haunting questions: was she pulling away? Could there be someone else? 25 years of trust felt fragile, like sand slipping through my hands. Camila and I met in the wild summer of '96, a time of freedom and reckless joy. At a beach bonfire, I saw her dancing barefoot, her laughter lighting up the night. She joined me on the sand after I played a song, and we talked and laughed like old friends. That night, we lived like nothing could touch us. We weren't saints, just two restless souls chasing life's thrill. Our youth was messy and impulsive, but it brought us together. I remember her asking if we'd always live this way, wild and free. Back then, I couldn't answer. Life eventually demanded stability, but the fire of those nights never left me. Now, as I watch her grow distant, I wonder if she's searching for the freedom we once had. If only she knew, I still feel it every time I look at her. It was a Wednesday evening, one of Camila's gym nights. I had grown used to her slipping out the door with her yoga mat in one hand and her water bottle in the other. For nights a week, she'd head to the same gym, returning hours later with that familiar post-workout glow. I used to admire her dedication, even envy it a little. But lately, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to these workouts than treadmills and Zumba classes. It wasn't just the frequency. It was the way she'd started dressing for them. Camila had always been beautiful, but now she was putting in extra effort: perfectly applied makeup, perfume that lingered long after she'd left, and workout clothes that seemed designed more to impress than to sweat in. When I'd comment, she'd wave me off with a quick, "It's for me, Mark. Makes me feel good about myself." And maybe it was. But something about it gnawed at me. Then came the email. It arrived just after lunch, with no subject line and a sender I didn't recognize. At first, I thought it was spam, but curiosity got the better of me. The message was short and to the point: "Your wife is cheating on you tonight. Follow her." I stared at the screen, my chest tightening as I reread the words. My mind raced with questions: who had sent it? Why would they tell me this? And most of all, could it be true? My first instinct was to dismiss it as a cruel joke. But deep down, I knew the unease I'd been feeling wasn't unfounded. I decided to follow her. That evening, as Camila got ready for her gym session, I watched her closely. She moved with an energy I hadn't seen in months, humming softly as she fixed her hair. Her makeup was flawless, her leggings perfectly matched her fitted top, and the scent of her perfume hung in the air like a secret she didn't want to share. "Heading out?" I asked casually, forcing a smile. "Yeah," she replied, slipping on her shoes. "Don't wait up. I might stay late for a steam room session." I nodded, my heart pounding as I watched her walk out the door. A part of me still hoped this was all some misunderstanding, that the email was a cruel prank and I was a fool for entertaining it. But I couldn't let it go. I grabbed my keys and followed her car at a safe distance. The gym was only a 15-minute drive, and for a while, it seemed like that's where she was headed. But then she took a turn, a sharp left down a quiet, residential street. My stomach dropped. I slowed my car, hanging back far enough that she wouldn't notice. She pulled into the driveway of a modest but well-kept house. I parked down the street, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. From the shadows, I watched as the front door opened, and a man stepped out. He looked no older than 24, tall and athletic with an easy, confident smile. Camila stepped out of her car, and he met her halfway, wrapping his arms around her and kissing her like they'd done it 100 times before. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt like it was caving in as I watched them walk inside, hand in hand, the door closing softly behind them. The sight was like a punch to the gut, a confirmation of everything I'd been too afraid to admit. For a moment, I considered leaving, driving home and convincing myself that what I'd seen was enough. But I couldn't. I needed to know. I needed the truth, no matter how much it would hurt. I crept out of the car, keeping to the shadows as I approached the house. The curtains were drawn, but a crack in the window gave me a glimpse inside. What I saw will haunt me for the rest of my life. Camila, my wife of 25 years, was with him, kissing, undressing, their bodies moving together in a way that left no room for doubt. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. It felt like the world had tilted off its axis, and I was standing on the edge, about to fall. I don't remember getting back to the car or driving home. I don't even remember opening the bottle of vodka. All I know is that by the time Camila came home, I was too drunk to confront her. I'd wanted to wait for her, to demand answers, to make her look me in the eye and explain how she could do this to me, to us. But instead, I drank until the room spun, and the pain dulled enough to let me sleep. I woke up to the dull, relentless pounding in my head, the unmistakable aftermath of a vodka-fueled night. My mouth was dry, my stomach churned, and my limbs felt weighted down as if I'd been buried alive under the weight of my own misery. But worse than the hangover was the memory, sharp and cruel, of what I'd seen the night before. Camila. That man. The betrayal. I sat up, groaning as the room tilted slightly. The ache in my head was nothing compared to the ache in my chest. For a moment, I wondered if it was possible to die from heartbreak. But then I heard the sound of her laughter drifting in from the kitchen, light, carefree, as if the world was perfectly intact. I forced myself out of bed and stumbled to the bathroom mirror. My reflection was unrecognizable, bloodshot eyes, disheveled hair, a face drawn tight with exhaustion and despair. How the hell did we get here? I thought. 25 years of marriage, 2 grown kids, a life built together, and now this. I made my way to the kitchen, where Camila stood at the counter, pouring coffee. She looked radiant, as always, her hair freshly brushed, her expression serene. She glanced at me and smiled. "Good morning," she said, sliding a mug toward me. "You drank too much last night. What was the occasion?" I stared at her, trying to reconcile the woman before me with the one I'd seen through that window. My throat was dry, and my words came out raspier than I intended. "I could ask you the same thing," I said. "Where were you for so long?" Camila's smile didn't falter. She sipped her coffee and leaned casually against the counter. "At training, of course. And afterward, I met a friend for coffee. We hadn't caught up in ages." Her answer was so calm, so natural, that for a fleeting moment, I doubted myself. Could it have all been a drunken hallucination? A nightmare born of paranoia and vodka? But no. I knew what I'd seen. The memory was etched into my mind, vivid and unshakable. Still, I didn't press her. I muttered something non-committal, grabbed my coffee, and headed to the shower. The warm water did little to soothe me, and as I stood there, my thoughts raced. Was I going crazy? Could I have imagined it all? Or was Camila simply an expert at hiding the truth? When I stepped out of the shower and wrapped a towel around myself, I checked my phone out of habit. That's when I saw it, the email. My stomach sank as I opened it. This time, there were photos. They hit me like a punch to the gut. There she was, Camila, kneeling naked in front of a man whose face wasn't visible. Her expression, though partially obscured, left no room for doubt. This wasn't an illusion or a misunderstanding. This was the brutal, undeniable truth. My body moved on autopilot as I marched into the kitchen, phone clutched tightly in my hand. Camila was still there, humming softly as she loaded dishes into the dishwasher. "Explain this," I said, thrusting the phone in front of her face. Her humming stopped abruptly, and her body stiffened. For a moment, she just stared at the screen, her face pale, her lips parted slightly as if she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. "Mark," she started, her voice trembling. "It's not what it looks like." "Not what it looks like?" I exploded. "Don't insult my intelligence, Camila. You think I don't know what I'm looking at? You think I don't know what I saw last night?" Her eyes filled with tears as she shook her head. "Please, let me explain." "Oh, I'm dying to hear this," I spat. "Go on, tell me how this isn't what it looks like. Tell me how 25 years of marriage ends with you sneaking around with some kid." She crumbled, tears streaming down her cheeks as she buried her face in her hands. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she sobbed. He seduced me. He was so attentive, so flattering. He made me feel," she paused, searching for the words. "He made me feel like a woman again." "A woman again?" I repeated, incredulous. "What the hell is that supposed to mean? You needed some 20-something punk to make you feel like a woman?" "He complimented me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He noticed me, Mark. He gave me gifts, asked me to dinner, made me feel special. I didn't plan for this. I didn't want this. But he wouldn't stop. And that's supposed to make this okay?" I shouted. "You think that justifies what you did?" She shook her head, her tears flowing freely now. "No, it doesn't. I know it doesn't. But I was so lonely, Mark. You were always busy, always distracted. And then he came along." "Who is he?" I demanded, cutting her off. Her shoulders sagged as she finally met my gaze. "He's my trainer. My new trainer at the gym." I stared at her, disbelief mingling with a fury I could barely contain. "Your trainer? The one who just moved to town?" She nodded, her silence saying more than her words. "Eve." The drive to his house felt like a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly I thought it might crack. My heart pounded in my chest, my mind a storm of rage and humiliation. I wasn't thinking clearly, I wasn't thinking at all. All I knew was that this kid, this smug little fitness trainer, had taken everything I had built with Camila and shattered it. He had to pay. When he opened the door, his expression shifted from surprise to smug recognition in an instant. "You're Camila's husband," he said, his lips curling into a smirk. "I was wondering when you'd—" I didn't let him finish. My fist connected with his jaw, sending him stumbling backward. "You bastard!" I shouted, stepping inside and slamming the door behind me. "You ruined my marriage, my life, everything." He recovered quickly, wiping his mouth and grinning like he'd just won a prize. "Is this your idea of handling things, old man?" he sneered. "Throwing punches? Pathetic." That was all it took. I lunged at him, swinging wildly. He dodged one punch but took the next squarely in the ribs. He grunted, then came back at me, landing a hit that sent me staggering into a side table, knocking a vase to the floor. The fight was brutal and chaotic. Fists flew, furniture toppled, and curses filled the air. My anger fueled me, but he was younger, stronger, and faster. He tackled me to the ground, pinning me down as I struggled beneath him. His face was inches from mine, a twisted mix of triumph and irritation. "Are you done?" he growled. "Because if you are, I've got something to tell you." I spat at him, writhing to break free. "I don't want to hear a damn word from you." "Oh, you'll want to hear this," he said, his grip tightening. "You think your wife's betrayal just happened? It didn't. I planned it. I sent you those emails." The words hit me like a freight train. I stopped struggling, staring up at him in disbelief. What the hell are you talking about? He leaned closer, his breath hot against my face. Those anonymous emails you got. That was me. I wanted you to know. But not everything. You'll find out why soon enough. His words ignited a fresh wave of fury. I bucked hard, shoving him off me with all the strength I had left. He stumbled backward, tripping over a chair leg. I watched as he fell, his head slamming against the sharp corner of a coffee table. The sound was sickening, a dull, wet thud that made my stomach churn. For a moment, everything was still. He lay crumpled on the floor, blood pooling beneath his head. My chest heaved as I stood over him, the adrenaline coursing through my veins giving way to something darker. Satisfaction, maybe. Or was it fear? I stared at him, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Part of me was glad that he was finally silenced, that he couldn't smirk or taunt me anymore. But another part of me, a quieter but growing part, was horrified. What had I done? Had I killed him? I dropped to my knees, my hands hovering over his body, unsure whether to help or flee. The blood was everywhere, seeping into the carpet, staining the pristine white of his shirt. I reached out to shake him, my voice trembling. Hey, wake up. He didn't move. Panic set in, clawing at my chest. I stood up and backed away, my eyes darting around the room as if searching for a way to undo what had just happened. My anger was gone, replaced by an icy dread. This wasn't what I wanted, not like this. I could feel my breath quickening, the walls closing in around me. Was he dead? Could I just leave and pretend none of this had happened? No. The thought was absurd. There was too much evidence, my fingerprints, the mess we'd made. And besides, leaving him there like that. I couldn't do it. Not even to him. I pulled my phone from my pocket, my hands shaking as I dialed. 911, I muttered when the operator answered. There's been an accident. A man is hurt. He's bleeding. Please, send an ambulance. The operator's voice was calm, asking questions I could barely process. I gave them the address, then hung up and sank into a chair. My head was pounding, my thoughts racing. What was I going to tell them? What was I going to tell Camila? I looked at the young man lying on the floor, his chest rising and falling faintly. He was alive, but barely. The sight of his blood-streaked face brought no relief, only a crushing weight of guilt and shame. This wasn't justice. This wasn't revenge. This was a disaster. The sound of sirens broke the silence, growing louder as they approached. I sat on the front steps of his house, my hands trembling, smeared with his blood. The paramedics had arrived quickly, too quickly, maybe. I hadn't even had time to think about what I was going to say, what I could possibly explain. 2 medics rushed past me and into the house. Moments later, they wheeled him out on a stretcher, his head bandaged, the blood already soaking through the gauze. He looked so small, so fragile, nothing like the arrogant, taunting figure I had fought less than an hour ago. Are you coming with us? One of the medics asked, snapping me out of my daze. I nodded wordlessly, not trusting myself to speak. They helped me into the ambulance, and I sat stiffly in the corner as they worked on him, shouting medical terms I didn't understand. His face was pale, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Every second felt like an eternity, the weight of what I'd done pressing down on me with unbearable force. When we reached the hospital, I was ushered into a waiting area while they wheeled him into the emergency room. I sat there, my head in my hands, trying to make sense of the chaos in my mind. What had started as a quest for revenge had spiraled into something far darker, something I couldn't control. After what felt like hours, a doctor approached me. She was stern but calm, her expression a careful mask of professionalism. Are you the one who called the ambulance? She asked. Yes, I said, my voice hoarse. Is he going to be okay? He's lost a significant amount of blood, she said. We're doing everything we can, but he needs a transfusion immediately. His blood type is AB negative, a very rare type. Do you know if he has family we can contact? I shook my head. No, I don't. But, I hesitated, my heart pounding. I'm AB negative. I can donate. Her eyes widened slightly, surprised. Are you sure? We'll need to test you first to confirm compatibility. Test me, I said, without a moment's hesitation. The next hour passed in a blur. They drew my blood, ran their tests, and prepared me for the transfusion. I lay on a hospital bed, staring at the ceiling as the needle went into my arm. The irony wasn't lost on me, that the same man I had nearly killed now depended on me for his survival. The thought made my stomach churn. By the time the transfusion was over, I was exhausted. The doctor thanked me curtly before disappearing back into the chaos of the emergency room. I sat up slowly, my head swimming, when I saw them, 2 police officers walking toward me. Mark Collins, one of them said. Yes, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. We need to take your statement about what happened tonight, he said, his tone neutral but firm. Can you start from the beginning? I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. It was an argument, I began, my words halting. Things got out of hand. I didn't mean to hurt him. The officer nodded, taking notes as I spoke. I tried to keep my story as truthful as possible without incriminating myself further, but I could see the skepticism in his eyes. Why were you at his house? He asked. I hesitated, glancing down at my hands. I found out he was involved with my wife. I went there to confront him. And the fight? The officer pressed. It wasn't planned, I said quickly. He said things, provoked me. I lost my temper. The officer exchanged a glance with his partner before continuing. We're going to need you to stay here while we wait for his statement. If his injuries are serious, this could escalate into a more severe charge. I nodded numbly, too drained to argue. As they walked away, I sank back into the chair, my thoughts spiraling. What had I done? My anger, my need for vengeance, it had all led to this. And now, I was sitting in a hospital, waiting for a man I despised to wake up and seal my fate. The hours dragged on. I replayed the events of the night over and over in my mind, each memory sharper and more damning than the last. When the doctor finally emerged again, I nearly jumped out of my seat. He's stable, she said. He's still unconscious, but we expect him to wake up soon. I nodded, relief and dread mingling in my chest. The officers returned, standing nearby as if waiting for the inevitable. I wanted to run, to disappear, but I knew there was no escaping this. The truth had a way of catching up, no matter how fast you tried to outrun it. As I sat there, staring at the sterile hospital walls, one thought consumed me: this wasn't just about Camila or the young man. This was about me, my choices, my actions, my inability to control the anger that had festered inside me. And now, I would have to face the consequences. 5 hours passed like a slow, torturous eternity. I sat just outside his hospital room, staring at the stark white walls, my mind a swirling vortex of anger, confusion, and guilt. The doctors had already told me he'd regained consciousness. They'd also made it a point to emphasize that the only reason he was alive was because of the blood I had donated, our blood, both AB negative, rare and strange, like the situation itself. That detail gnawed at me, adding to the weight of everything else. Why was his blood type the same as mine? It felt like one more puzzle piece in a picture I didn't understand. Then there were the questions about those emails, about his cruel game, about why he had deliberately exposed himself, knowing it could cost him everything. The doctor's voice cut through my thoughts. Mr. Collins, he's asking to see you. I nodded stiffly, feeling the tension rise again in my chest. Standing outside his room, I hesitated, my hand on the doorframe. I wasn't sure what to expect. A confrontation? More taunts? But instead, when I stepped inside, I saw him lying there, pale and bandaged, his eyes tired yet calm. "You came," he said, his voice low and strained. I stayed near the door, unsure of what to say. "The doctors said you wanted to see me." He nodded slowly, then gestured weakly to the chair beside his bed. "Sit, please." Reluctantly, I sat, the silence between us thick with unspoken words. He spoke first. "Thank you," he said, his voice quieter now. "For saving my life. For giving your blood. You didn't have to." I looked at him, my emotions a tangled mess. "I didn't do it for you," I admitted, my voice clipped. "I did it because I couldn't let someone die. Even you." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Even me," he echoed. "Fair enough." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he shifted slightly in his bed, wincing at the movement. "I owe you an apology," he said. "For what I did. For everything. I caused you pain. A lot of it." "Why?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "Why would you do this? Why go after my wife? Why send those emails? What the hell did I ever do to you?" His gaze met mine, and for the first time, there was no trace of the smug arrogance I'd seen before. Instead, there was something raw and vulnerable, something I hadn't expected. "You deserve to know," he said, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. "You deserve to know why I hate you so much." I leaned forward, my heart pounding. "Then tell me." He took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling slowly, as though preparing himself. Then, with quiet deliberation, he said the words that shattered my world. "Because you left me, Father." The room spun, the air thick and suffocating. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. "What?" I managed to choke out. "What are you talking about?" He held my gaze, his expression unwavering. "You're my father. And I've spent my entire life hating you for it." It felt like a dagger had been driven into my chest. "That's impossible," I stammered. "I don't, how could?" 24 years ago, he interrupted, his voice sharp. "You met my mother. You had your fun, and then you left. When she told you she was pregnant, you told her to get an abortion. You walked away like we were nothing. But she didn't go through with it. She raised me on her own." I stared at him, my mind reeling. Memories from a lifetime ago surfaced, hazy and fragmented. A woman. A fling. Her tears when she told me she was pregnant. My cowardice. My insistence that it wasn't my problem. The decision I had buried so deep I had almost forgotten it. "My mother told me everything," he continued, his voice trembling with anger. "She told me on her deathbed, years later. I spent my life wondering who my father was, and when I finally found out, I swore I'd make you feel the kind of pain you caused me and her. The kind of pain I lived with my whole damn life." I couldn't breathe. His words slammed into me with the weight of 2 decades of regret. "I didn't know," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I didn't know she kept you. I didn't know you existed." "That doesn't change what you did," he snapped, his eyes blazing. "You abandoned us. You ordered her to get rid of me, like I was nothing." I looked away, shame burning through me. "I was young," I said weakly. "Stupid. I made a mistake, a horrible mistake. And I've regretted it every day since." "Not enough to come looking for us," he said bitterly. "Not enough to even wonder if I was out there." He was right, and the weight of that truth crushed me. "I'm sorry," I said finally, my voice breaking. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am. I'm sorry for what I did to your mother. For what I did to you. I was selfish. And I didn't know. I didn't know you were out there. For a long moment, he said nothing. His breathing was shallow, his face pale. I didn't want your apology, he said quietly. I wanted to take something from you. To hurt you the way you hurt me. That's why I went after Camila. Not because I wanted her, but because I wanted you to feel what it's like to lose someone you love. I felt the weight of his words like a hammer to the chest. He had succeeded. I had felt that pain, and it had nearly destroyed me. I don't know if I can fix this, I said, my voice barely audible. But if you'll let me, I want to try. His eyes softened, just slightly. Maybe. But not today. I nodded, rising from the chair. For what it's worth, I said, pausing at the door, I'm glad you're alive. I'm glad I could help. As I stepped out into the hallway, the weight of his revelation settled over me like a storm cloud. My past had finally caught up to me, and now, I had to figure out how to face it him.